Hey guys, so I'm going to do a bit of an Explain Like I'm 5 overview of the current jungle meta for the Season 6 World Championships. Most of the jungle champions that we've seen have all had early pressure as the sort of connecting theme. Early pressure can mean a lot of things. So before we get into anything else, let's go over the champions that we've seen played in the jungle role. So just alphabetically, we have seen Elise, Graves, Hecarim, Lee Sin, Nidalee, Olaf, Rek'Sai, Skarner. So these champions are fairly different in what they can provide to a team, and some fit well in specific team compositions and some don't. But most of these champions, sort of, with the exception of kind of Hecarim and kind of Skarner, they can almost entirely dictate the early game on their own, and whether that's not directly by their actions, it's still what sort of information the jungler can relay. So early pressure jungles are getting picked because people have come to the conclusion that specific champions in lane are really, really strong. So if we look at top lane, take a champion like Jace, for example. Jace is a really big lane bully. He does super well into a lot of matchups. He does really well into Poppy. He does decently into Rumble. He does decently into Kennen. And by his own laning capabilities, by denying the enemy farm with his ranged harass, he can accumulate a gold differential between him and the enemy top laner, which will then transition into potential mid-game teamfight wins and potential objectives off of that. Jace, however, is fairly vulnerable to being ganked. He doesn't do super well in a 1v2 scenario because he is immobile. Obviously, he has a little bit of survivability in terms of his knockback in his hammer form, or in his melee form, and his acceleration gate in his ranged form. And some of the time, that'll allow him to get away from a gank. But if he is overextended, most of the time you're going to be able to force a flash or get a kill, or both maybe. And these top tier players, they know when they can and cannot abuse their power spikes in lane, whether that's off of the position of the wave, or when the enemy goes to CS, or off of an item breakpoint. And a lot of the time, you can't get away with stuff because you don't know where the enemy jungler is. And of course, one of the number one rules of League of Legends is sort of like Pavlov's brush. Until you ward the brush, this is a weird analogy, but it's the whole idea of there's always a jungler sitting in the fog of war, unless otherwise seen. And that's what a lot of these junglers are really good at doing. They're really good at tracking the enemy jungler and giving their team information based off of that. So take a champion like Nidalee, for example. Nidalee has an insane jungle clear. She can get through her camps in a breeze and then go look to walk into the enemy jungle. And there's a lot of things you can do. You can either take away camps and get an experience and a gold lead that way. Experience lead is huge if you're even on gold, but you have a level on the enemy champion. That'll allow you to force them out of their jungle just by the fact that early game levels have so much gold value in terms of stats that you get from leveling up. And so Nidalee does her camps really, really quickly, one of the fastest clears in the game. And with that, she can look to steal away camps or get Scuttle Crab or fight you in your jungle, and that will allow her to track the enemy jungler in the fact that, okay, I've walked into their enemy's blue side, I've stolen a camp, and I've put a ward down, I have not found the enemy jungler, and by process of elimination, I can determine that the enemy champion could potentially be in their top side, or in their red side. And that in itself is really helpful information. So say you track the enemy jungler and you find them, then you can say, okay, the enemy jungler is on the top side of the map, bottom lane, do your stuff, have fun. So, again, if you have a lane bully lane, say something like a Nami Caitlyn or like a Karma Jhin, that will a lot of the time be able to win a 2v2. And you say, hey, you can skirmish right now, and there will be no outside interference. Have a field day. That will allow your bottom lane to maybe get like a 5 CS lead, but that 5 CS lead could quickly turn into a 10 CS lead, which could, again, snowball into more and more. So say it gets to 15 minutes in the game, and you have like a 35-40 CS lead. That's kind of extreme for pro play. I mean, so like Jesus Christ, anything can happen. But say it gets to the point where you have slowly crept up a CS lead over the enemy bot lane, that will allow you to potentially force a fight over an objective or just take an objective. Because if you say, hey, we're like an Infernal Dragon spawn, it's like, oh shit, everyone wants Infernal. Too bad I have 2 longswords on the enemy ADC, or I have a serrated dirk to their Cull and Boots, and Doran's Blade. That will most of the time let you win a team fight or a duel if sort of a early game skirmish breaks out when you're just on those item breakpoints. And so because of the information that you relayed, allowing your bot lane to abuse their lane and get the CS lead, that can easily transition into objectives. So champions like Elise, Nidalee, Lee Sin, Rek'Sai, Olaf, they are really good at dueling the enemy jungler, and so in a lot of situations you can walk into the enemy jungle and potentially fight them. And again, sort of that is where a lot of the mid lane picks come from as well. Currently, lane bullies and lane shoving is very high in the priority list for mid lane champions. So you're seeing champions like Aurelion Sol, like Syndra, like Victor, like Malzahar, who all have some better than others. Aurelion Sol is like top tier in terms of lane shoving right now, but they can shove their lane, and if the enemy mid laner has the wave crashing into their turret, if they decide to roam and try and kill you when you're invading the jungle, then they are going to lose CS, and it is a risk that they might not be willing to take. Whereas your mid laner, because they're not losing CS because they've already shoved the wave in, and the next wave will just crash into theirs without it dying to a turret, they will be able to help you out with your invade. And that's where a lot of that comes from. And an invade doesn't necessarily mean to kill. An invade can just mean to get a couple wards in the enemy jungle, but having the safety in numbers will sort of allow you to be more confident and just generally much safer. Most of these champions also have relative usefulness at all stages of the game. So early, mid, and late game. Lee Sin is sort of notorious for falling off, and yes, his damage isn't insane in the late game like it is in the early game, but a single Dragon's Rage can dictate a game potentially, just because if you can get a sick insec on an enemy AD and maybe like knock somebody else up along the way too, then that could lead to a Baron or an Elder Dragon, and that can, again, allow you to close out a game. Somebody like Elise has really various build paths, so you can build like full assassin and 100 to 0 somebody potentially, or build full tank and be just a team fight nuisance and a stun bot. Somebody like Graves is a really strong duelist and is essentially a second AD carry in fights, as well as being able to invade the enemy jungle really well, just because he can do so much damage and force them to back. And then people like Skarner, if you can force an enemy champion to have a suboptimal build, if you force an enemy AP mid laner to forego one of their efficient item slots and it gets to late game, if you force like a Syndra or a Cassiopeia to build a Mercurial Scimitar, which could have been something like a Rabadon's, that in itself is just ridiculous. The fact that you're making them build suboptimally is really somewhat broken in a game sense. Obviously, not all games go to 6 items, and if you can close it out early and just get QSSs, that's awesome, and you can counter it, and it's fine. But that potential is there. And then people like Hecarim, people like Olaf are huge. Basically 80 carry annoyances. They're really good at diving the back lane. Hecarim is kind of like a worse Olaf right now in the fact that he's much easier to get CC'd, and they sort of do similar things, as in they run forward at people. And Olaf, of course, has Ragnarok. But Ghost users in general are strong because Ghost, as a summoner spell, is really strong. You know, champions like Rek'Sai, she builds full tank and still does a lot of damage, and she has great ability to track the enemy jungler with her Tremor Sense. Most of these junglers also have some sort of neutral objective control, whether it be an execute or just an ability combo. You know, Elise, Lee Sin, Nidalee all have an execute on their Q. And somebody like Olaf, he can combo a smite with a true damage, reckless swing, and you know, obviously some of those combinations are more powerful than the others. So, and Elise, Spider Form Q plus smite is gonna be a little bit stronger than an Olaf reckless swing smite. But the fact that these champions also have that capability in the hands of pro players who are very familiar with the combos, that is another reason why they're so popular. It'll be really interesting to see if there are any new picks that come out. I'm hoping to see maybe Kha'Zix, maybe some more Zac. Obviously, the world storyline just gets memeier and memeier. So in a couple weeks' time, we will know if the gap truly is closing, or if the only closing gap lies within Sneaky's butthole.